All right, so ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 5, Section 3, talking about managing prices. We're going to look at how the government attempts to manage prices and the problems that occur when it actually does. So, we've already talked a little bit about government involvement, and the price system, we've already talked about how it has limitations. You have externalities, those side effects that aren't taken into account by the market. You have public goods, goods that are used by everybody, and the government can't exclude people, so therefore the government has to make sure everybody pays for those public goods through taxes. We talked about police and fire as a couple examples of those, and instability is another example of a limitation of the price system. So to address these limitations, the government sometimes gets involved in the marketplace, and many times to do this, they'll try and set prices. So the government sometimes sets prices to protect producers and consumers from dramatic price swings. They do this by setting price ceilings and price floors. Well, price ceiling is a government regulation that establishes a maximum price for a particular good. So with a price ceiling, you can't go above the ceiling, so it sets a maximum price for a particular good. A good example of this would be rent control. Out in the East Coast, they have what's called rent control, which sets a maximum for the amount that a landlord can charge for rent. That is an example of a price ceiling. You also have a price floor. That's a government regulation establishes a minimum level for prices, so you can't go below the floor. An example of that would be the minimum wage. That sets a floor on the price of labor. You can't pay less for labor than what is set at the minimum wage. Okay, so price ceiling, once again, it sets a maximum price, and a price floor will set a minimum level for prices. All right, so interfering in supply and demand can cause imbalances and prevent people from reaching equilibrium. So price ceilings usually result in shortages. We talked about how rent control is an example of a price ceiling. And what rent control does is you usually will create a shortage of apartments, because what happens is these landlords can't charge as much as they would like for rent, so they just don't rent out the apartments, and it creates a shortage of apartments. Price floors tend to result in surpluses. So the minimum wage will create a surplus of labor. Okay, there are more people looking for work. Then there are people willing to hire at that minimum wage, and so therefore you have a surplus of labor. These businesses are hiring less people because the people are more expensive. So let's look at this in a graphical format here. So you don't have to take this down, just go ahead and follow along. So we have a supply-demand graph, and let's say we set a price floor at P1. Okay, so you can't go below P1. And so if you go across from P1, you can see Q1 is demanded and Q3 is supplied. So there's a lot more supply than demanded, so therefore you have a surplus. Now, if you look at P, let's say we're looking at a price ceiling. So let's look at, we have P3. Okay, the price of P3. So that's a price ceiling due to a price control. So you can't go above that ceiling. So you can see there's about Q1 supplied. There is Q3 is demanded. So there's a lot more demanded than supplied. So therefore, you have a shortage. Okay, so those price ceilings, the price ceiling created a shortage, the price floor created a surplus. All right, another negative side effect that can occur when the government is manipulating prices is you have what is called rationing. That occurs when the supply of a good is too low, And it's a system which the government or another institution decides how to distribute the product. Many examples of rationing, particularly in times of war, like World War I, World War II, you see historically lots of rationing going on. Lots of people do feel that this is an unwise economic policy because they believe it's unfair, because the government is giving certain people special treatment, it's picking winners and losers, and there's also administrative costs, so it's expensive as well. So a good example, another good example of rationing would be the gas lines of the 70s. So what happened here was the US government set up a price ceiling on gasoline. So that created a shortage of, this was back in the 1970s, and it created a shortage of gasoline. So because of that, what the government decided to do is they decided to say, well, if your license plate starts with a B, or D, or they pick, basically different letters. If your license plate starts with that letter, then you can go ahead and get gas on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And if your license plate starts with a Z, X, or a Y, you can get gas on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays, for example. And so what happened was used because everybody had to get gas on those particular days that they were assigned. You had really long lines waiting to get gasoline, so you can see those gas lines that occurred in the 1970s. So that was an example of the rationing that occurred when you had a price ceiling. And then finally, you have black markets. So in black markets, goods are exchanged illegally at prices that are higher than officially established prices. So when the government gets involved, lots of times you will see these black markets be created. Drugs are sold in the black market. Illegal weapons are sold on the black market. Scalpers that sell tickets and so forth. Those could be considered a black market as well. All right, so let's do number one here. So if the government establishes a maximum price for a good, they've established a what? A maximum price for a good. What is that? And number two, rationing occurs when the supply of a good is too low, high, or none of the above. So you can pause this if you like to answer that. Otherwise, let's move on and do the summary. So we're going to go ahead and describe the difference between a price ceiling and a price floor, and what effect the price ceiling and the price floor has on markets.